Lucas stood by the window, a half-empty tumbler of whiskey in his hand, though he hadn't taken a sip in over an hour. His tailored suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly styled, his posture rigid, as if even his body refused to betray the exhaustion beneath. At 42, he owned 3 multinational companies, a private jet, and more real estate than most countries. And yet, in that moment, he felt like a man standing on the edge of something vast and empty. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, soft but efficient. "Mr. Moretti, your car is ready. Miss Clara is waiting downstairs." He didn't turn. "Tell her I'll be down in 5. A pause. She said, "She brought your favorite tie. The navy one." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, brief, practiced. "Good. Tell her I appreciate it." He set the glass down carefully, as though it might shatter if handled too roughly. He smoothed the lapels of his jacket, adjusted his cufflinks. Tiny rituals of control. Control was Lucas's language. It was how he'd built his empire, how he'd survived his father's cruelty, how he'd walked away from his marriage without looking back. Because feelings were liabilities. He remembered the last time he'd seen Isabella. 5 years ago. She'd stood in this very room, her eyes dry but her voice trembling only slightly as she said, "I don't want your money, Lucas. I just want you to stop pretending I don't exist." He'd replied coolly, "If you're unhappy, then leave. No one's holding you here." She'd left. No drama, no shouting, just the soft click of the door closing behind her, and the silence that had followed him ever since. Now, he was heading to a secluded mountain resort for the weekend with Clara. His current companion, elegant, witty, ambitious in all the right ways. She understood his world. She didn't ask for promises. She didn't ask for love. She asked for presence. And discretion. Perfect. As the elevator descended, Lucas smoothed his hair again, not out of vanity, but habit. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson. He didn't know it yet, but this weekend wouldn't be an escape. It would be an awakening. The car idled at the curb, sleek and black as midnight. Clara stepped out, wrapped in a cream cashmere coat, her smile warm but measured. She held up a garment bag. "Got your tie," she said, her voice light, "and I packed your favorite book, though I doubt you'll read it." He opened the door for her, a practiced gesture. "You know me too well." "Do I?" she asked, just softly enough that he almost missed it. He paused, one foot in the car, the other still on the pavement. Raindrops caught in his hair. For a heartbeat, something flickered in his chest. Doubt, loneliness, he pushed it down. "No one really knows me, Clara," he said, sliding in beside her. "And that's how it should be." The car pulled away from the curb, gliding through the wet streets like a shadow. The city faded behind them, replaced by winding roads, then forests, then the quiet majesty of the mountains. Lucas watched the trees blur past, his mind empty for the first time in years. He thought he was going to rest. He didn't know he was going to meet his children. He didn't know his past was waiting for him in the crisp mountain air, with 3 small faces that looked exactly like his, and a woman who'd carried a secret so heavy, it had shaped her into someone stronger than he'd ever been. But that truth was still hours away. For now, Lucas Moretti, tycoon, strategist, master of control, simply closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the road lull him into a false sense of peace. The storm inside him hadn't begun to break. Not yet. Certo, agora tu como narrador e storyteller desenvolva a historia sem marcacos com o nome de cada topico que for desenvolve. Mi conti sobrio topico tu com dialogo como seu fosso espectador. Sempre lembrando de desenvolver com muita emoco. Com muitos sentimentos de forma que a estrutura de narrativa utiliza uma linha temporal linear de modo o espectador sentir o que o personagem está sentindo amigos. Com 6.000 characters 4:16 p.m. before Lucas Moretti vanished into boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, there was Isabella. Quiet, fiercely intelligent, with a smile that bloomed like morning light after a long night. She wasn't the kind of woman who chased headlines or red carpets. She preferred libraries to gala dinners, handwritten letters to text messages, and silence that spoke louder than noise ever could. 5 years ago, she'd walked out of Lucas's penthouse with nothing but a worn leather suitcase and a heart stitched back together with stubborn hope. She hadn't cried, not then. Tears came later, in the tiny rented apartment with peeling paint and a kitchen that smelled of rain and stale coffee. That's where she'd taken the pregnancy test. Alone, terrified, and utterly resolved. Now, she stood on the wooden porch of a secluded mountain lodge, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as if holding herself together. Autumn leaves swirled around her ankles, crisp and gold. Behind her, laughter, bright, bubbling, innocent, floated through the open window, the kind of sound that could heal even the deepest wounds. "Mama, Leo pushed me again," cried a little voice. "No, I didn't. She tripped," came the indignant reply. Isabella turned, softening instantly. "Both of you, come here." 3 children tumbled out onto the porch like puppies. 2 boys and a girl, all with the same storm gray eyes, tousled dark hair, and dimples that appeared only when they grinned. Identical in spirit, though their personalities were already carving their own paths. Leo always bold, Sophia thoughtful and observant, Matteo gentle with a habit of hugging things, trees, books, even stray clouds. She knelt, brushing a leaf from Sophia's cheek. "Did you say please before taking the toy?" "Leo," he scowled. "She wouldn't share." "And you," she looked at Sophia. "Did you remember what we talked about? Sharing isn't losing. It's giving someone a piece of your joy." Sophia bit her lip, then nodded. "Sorry, Leo." Leo hesitated, then held out a small wooden horse. "You can have him for 5 minutes." Isabella smiled. Not a grand smile, just a quiet one, the kind that lives in the corners of tired eyes. "That's my brave boy." She stood, watching them run back inside, their tiny boots thudding against the floorboards. For a moment, she leaned against the doorframe, breathing in the pine-scented air. This place, this peace hadn't come easily. After the divorce, she'd sold her jewelry, taken night classes in child development, worked double shifts at a bookstore, then later as a freelance editor. She'd done it all with one rule: they will never feel like a burden. And they didn't. But there were nights. Oh, there were nights when she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd made the right choice keeping Lucas in the dark. She'd thought of calling him 100 times, especially when Matteo spiked a fever at 2 a.m., or when Sophia asked, "Do other daddies live far away too?" She'd tell them, "Some daddies are still learning how to be ready." Now, standing here in the mountain quiet, she felt a familiar ache. Not regret, but longing. Not for Lucas the man, but for the father her children deserved to know. If only he could love them without conditions, without control. A soft knock on the lodge's side door startled her. She turned. It was Mrs. Delaney, the elderly owner of the resort, holding a basket of fresh-baked bread. "Thought you might like this, dear. You and those sweet angels." Isabella accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Eleanor. You've been so kind." The woman's eyes softened. "They remind me of my grandkids. All energy, all heart." She paused, lowering her voice. "There's another guest arriving today. Wealthy man. Reserved the whole East Wing. Name's Moretti." Isabella froze. The basket nearly slipped from her hands. "Moretti," she whispered. "Yes, Lucas Moretti. You know him." Isabella's breath caught. The name hit her like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading fast, deep, unstoppable. "No," she said quickly, too quickly. I've just heard the name in the news." She forced a smile, but inside, her chest tightened like a vice. "Lucas, here now." Mrs. Delaney patted her arm. "Don't worry, dear. Place is big enough for everyone. And with that storm rolling in, I doubt he'll be wandering far." But Isabella knew better. Fate didn't knock politely, kicked the door down. She glanced toward the window, where her children were drawing pictures at the kitchen table. 3 small figures holding hands under a wobbly sun. One of them had scribbled a 4th figure in the corner, faint, almost hesitant. When she'd asked who it was, Mateo had looked up with those gray eyes, Lucas's eyes, and said, "The man in my dreams, Mama. He watches us from far away." Her heart shattered all over again. She set the bread down carefully, then walked to the window, placing a hand on the cool glass. The mountains stood tall and unmoving, indifferent to the storm gathering not just in the sky, but in her soul. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't prepared. But she would protect them. Always. Even if the man who gave them life finally came looking. She would meet him not as the woman he left behind, but as the mother who'd carried his future in silence, strength, and love. And if he dared to hurt them, she'd walk through fire before letting that happen. But for now, she took a deep breath, smoothed her sweater, and called out, voice steady, warm, "All right, my loves. Who's ready for hot cocoa and story time?" 3 voices shouted in unison. Me, half dozing with his thumb near his mouth, Mateo tracing the illustrations with a careful finger. Outside, tires crunched over gravel. Isabella's voice didn't falter, but her fingers tightened around the book. She didn't need to look. She knew. It was him. Through the window, a sleek black town car idled at the edge of the drive. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed without a word. He adjusted his coat, glanced up at the lodge with detached assessment, and then paused. His gaze snagged on the window, on her. Time didn't stop, it stuttered. Isabella kept reading, her voice miraculously steady. And the little fox whispered, "Even if you're far away, I'll always know your heart." But her eyes lifted, just for a second. And there he was, Lucas Moretti, older, sharper, still devastatingly handsome, but with new lines around his eyes, lines that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Lines carved by sleepless nights and decisions that cost more than money. Beside him, a woman emerged from the car, elegant in a dove-gray coat, her auburn hair swept into a low chignon. Clara. Isabella had seen her in magazines, always at Lucas's arm during galas, always smiling with perfect composure. Now, Clara glanced at the lodge, then at Lucas, her expression shifting when she noticed where he was staring. "Do you know them?" Clara asked, her voice smooth but edged with curiosity. Lucas didn't answer right away. He just kept looking. His expression unreadable, but his breath shallow, his posture rigid in a way Isabella recognized. It was the look he got when something threatened his control. "No," he finally said, too quickly. "I've never been here before." But his eyes said otherwise. Inside, Leo stirred. "Mama, who's that man?" Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. "Just a guest, sweetheart. Go back to sleep." But Mateo sat up, wide awake now. "He looks like my drawing." Her stomach dropped. Outside, Lucas took a step forward, then stopped himself. He turned to Clara, forcing calm into his voice. "Let's get settled. It's getting late." Clara nodded, but her eyes lingered on the window a beat too long. "Strange," she murmured. "I thought this place was booked for private use." "It is," Lucas said, already walking toward the entrance, his jaw clenched. The lodge's old wooden door groaned as he pushed it open. Warmth and the scent of cinnamon met him, so ordinary, so domestic. And then, from the sitting room, the sound of a child's giggle. He froze in the foyer. Clara removed her gloves, glancing around with polite interest. "Charming. Rustic. I can see why you chose it." Lucas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the archway leading to the sitting room. He could see the edge of a blanket, the curl of a child's hair, the back of a woman's head as she leaned over to tuck a blanket around small shoulders. Clara touched his arm gently. "Are you all right?" He blinked, as if waking from a dream. "Fine. Just tired." But his voice was rough, unsteady. Upstairs, the resort manager greeted them with keys and apologies. "Terribly sorry, Mr. Moretti. Due to a double-booking error, your East Wing suite won't be ready until tomorrow morning. We've prepared the best available room for tonight. It's cozier." Lucas barely registered the words. His mind was still downstairs, in that room filled with warmth and whispers and something that felt dangerously like home. Later, as Clara unpacked in their temporary room, smaller, simpler, overlooking the garden, she watched him through the mirror. He stood by the window, staring down at the porch below. "Lucas," she said softly, folding a silk blouse, "you've been quiet since we arrived. Is something wrong?" He didn't turn. "Nothing's wrong. You keep looking at that family like you've seen a ghost." A beat of silence. Then, quietly, "Maybe I have." Clara turned fully, her expression shifting from concern to something sharper. Worry, perhaps, or the first flicker of jealousy. "Do you know her?" He finally faced her, his eyes shadowed. "Her name is Isabella. We were married. Briefly." Clara's breath caught. She'd known about the ex-wife. Everyone in his circle did, but she'd been told it was a short, passionless union, dissolved before it ever truly began. No drama, no lingering ties. "Then why does she have 3 children who look exactly like you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas went very still. He hadn't let himself fully process it. Not yet. But now, spoken aloud, the truth hung between them like a storm cloud ready to burst. "I don't know," he said, though even he heard the lie in it. Because deep down, in a place he rarely visited, he did know. He remembered the night Isabella had called him, months after their separation, her voice trembling. "I need to talk to you. It's important." He'd been in Tokyo closing a merger. He'd said, "Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something critical." She'd paused. Then, "Never mind. It's not important anymore." He'd never called her back. Now, standing in this quiet mountain lodge, the weight of that missed call pressed down on him like stone. Downstairs, Isabella blew out the candle on the windowsill, her movements slow, deliberate. She glanced up and saw Lucas's silhouette in the upper window. Their eyes met across the darkening yard. No words, no accusations, just 2 people bound by a past they thought was buried, and 3 small lives that had risen from its ashes. And as the first drops of rain began to fall, Clara watched Lucas's face and saw something she'd never seen before. Fear, not of losing her. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her knuckles were white. She'd seen the way his breath hitched when he looked at those children. She'd heard the break in his voice when he said his ex-wife's name. This wasn't just recognition. This was reckoning. "Lucas," she said softly, "if there's something you're not telling me." He didn't turn. "There's nothing to tell." But the words rang hollow even to him, because the truth was already unraveling in his chest, thread by thread. He remembered it all now. The summer they'd married on a whim in Tuscany, sun-drenched and reckless, Isabella laughing as he slipped a plain gold band on her finger. He'd promised her the world, but even then, he'd held back the one thing she truly wanted: a family. "I don't want kids," he'd said one night, months into their marriage, as they lay in bed watching stars through the skylight. "They're a distraction, a risk. My life is built on precision, Isabella, on control." She turned to him, her eyes wide and wounded. "But what if love isn't about control? What if it's about surrender?" He hadn't answered. He'd kissed her instead, deep, desperate, as if he could smother the question before it took root. And when she'd brought it up again a year later, tentative, hopeful, her hand resting on her belly in the way women do when they're testing the waters, he'd shut it down with cold logic. "We're not ready. My company is going public. One child could derail everything." She'd gone quiet after that, withdrawn. And then, one evening, she'd packed a single suitcase and said, "I can't live a life that's always on hold for your someday." He'd let her go, because he'd been certain that children would weaken him, that love without boundaries was chaos. But now, standing here, he could still hear the echo of her voice on the phone that night 5 years ago. "I need to talk to you. It's important." And he'd said, "Can it wait?" He hadn't known she was pregnant. He hadn't known she was carrying 3. And now, they were here, real, breathing, laughing, and he'd missed every first step, every first word, every feverish night, every bedtime story. The weight of it crushed him. Downstairs, Isabella sat alone in the dim glow of the sitting room, the children finally asleep. She held a framed photo in her hands, one she never showed anyone. It was taken the day before she left him. They were on a balcony in Santorini, the sea blue behind them, Lucas's arm loosely around her waist, both of them smiling like they believed in forever. She traced his face with her thumb. "I didn't hide them from you to punish you," she whispered to the empty room. "I hid them to protect them from the man you were." A soft knock startled her. She quickly tucked the photo beneath a cushion and stood. Yes, the door creaked open. It was Lucas. He stood in the threshold, water glistening in his hair from the rain. His expensive coat gone, his shirt slightly rumpled, disheveled in a way she'd never seen before. He looked human. "Can we talk?" he asked, voice rough. Isabella's pulse spiked, but she kept her voice calm. "It's late, Lucas." "I know." He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. I need to understand." She crossed her arms, not out of defensiveness, but to keep herself from trembling. "Understand what? Those children." He swallowed hard. "Are they?" "Yes," she said simply. "They're yours." The word hit him like a wave, knocking the breath from his lungs. He leaned against the doorframe for a moment, eyes closed. When he opened them, they were glistening. "How?" he whispered. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because the night I called you," she said, stepping closer, her voice low but fierce. "You were too busy to listen, and when I saw the man you were, the man who called love a liability, I knew you'd see them as a burden, not as a gift." He flinched. "I would have," he started. "You did," she interrupted gently. "You chose your empire over us, over me, and I refused to let my children grow up feeling like second choices." Silence stretched between them, thick with years of unsaid words. Then, quietly, "What are their names?" Her expression softened, just slightly. "Leo, Matteo, Sophia." He repeated them under his breath, as if memorizing a prayer. "How old are they?" 4.5. He nodded, absorbing it. "And you raised them alone?" "I had help," she said. "My sister, a neighbor, but yes, mostly alone." He looked around the cozy room, the handmade quilts, the bookshelf filled with well-loved stories, the crayon drawings taped to the wall. This wasn't the life he would have given them. No private tutors, no penthouse views, no security teams, but it was full of love. And suddenly, he understood she hadn't just raised them. She'd shielded them from his ambition, his coldness, his fear. "I'm not that man anymore," he said, his voice cracking. "Are you sure?" she asked, searching his eyes. "Because if you're here to claim them like assets, if you think you can just walk in and take what you ignored for years, I don't want to take," he said, stepping forward, his hands open at his sides. "I want to learn, to be worthy of them." Isabella studied him, the new lines around his eyes, the humility in his stance, the rawness in his voice. This wasn't the Lucas who walked out of boardrooms like a king. This was a man standing in the ruins of his own choices, asking for a second chance. Outside, thunder rumbled, and somewhere upstairs, a child stirred in their sleep, calling out, faintly, for Mama. Isabella turned toward the sound, her heart breaking and mending at once, watching Lucas pace the length of the small room like a caged animal. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. "You're going to see them again today," she said, not as a question, but as a quiet certainty. He stopped, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. "I have to." "Do you?" She turned, her arms crossed, eyes sharp but not unkind. "Or do you just want to because there's a difference, Lucas? Wanting is selfish. Needing, that's something else." He looked at her then, really looked. "I need to know them. Not as heirs, not as consequences, but as people." Clara exhaled slowly. She'd known this weekend wouldn't be what she expected, but she hadn't anticipated this. The ghost of a life Lucas never knew he'd left behind, walking around with his eyes and his laugh, wrapped in tiny sweaters and bedtime fears. Downstairs, the scent of coffee and toast drifted through the halls. Isabella moved through the kitchen with the quiet efficiency of someone used to mornings that began before sunrise. She poured juice into 3 small cups, cut fruit into bite-sized pieces, and set out mismatched plates with care, each one chosen for the child who'd use it. Leo liked the blue one. Sophia preferred pink. Matteo always chose the one with the chipped edge, because it's brave. The children padded in, one by one, rubbing sleep from their eyes, hair tousled, voices still soft with dreams. "Mama," Sophia whispered, clutching her stuffed rabbit, "is the storm gone?" "Almost, sweetheart," Isabella said, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "The sun's coming." Leo peered out the window. "That man is still here." Isabella's hand stilled on the toaster. "Which man, Leo?" "The one from last night. The one who looks like Matteo's drawing." Her breath caught. She glanced outside and saw Lucas standing on the edge of the porch. Not too close, not intruding, just waiting, watching them through the glass with an expression she couldn't name. Longing or regret, she turned back to the children, forcing calm into her voice. "He's just a guest, like I said. But he looked at us like he knew us," Matteo said softly, climbing onto his chair. Isabella knelt beside him, her voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes people look at families and remember what they lost. That doesn't mean it's about us." But even as she said it, she knew it was about them. Just then, a knock. Not loud, not demanding, just 3 soft raps. All 3 children turned toward the door. Isabella stood slowly, heart hammering. She walked to the entryway and opened it just a crack. Lucas stood there, clean-shaven, wearing a simple sweater instead of his usual tailored shirt, holding a paper bag. He looked nervous, human. "I brought pastries," he said, voice low, "from the bakery in town. The one with the blue awning. You used to love their almond croissants." She blinked. He remembered that. "I didn't know if you'd still." He trailed off, eyes flicking past her to the kitchen, where 3 small faces watched with wide-eyed curiosity. Isabella hesitated, then opened the door wider. Just a few inches. Enough. He stepped inside, careful not to cross the threshold too far. "Good morning," he said to the children, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Leo squinted. "Are you the man from the window?" "Yes," Lucas said. "My name is Lucas." Sophia tilted her head. Like my storybook prince, a faint smile touched his lips. "Not quite, but I do like stories." Matteo slid off his chair and walked forward, slowly, cautiously, until he stood just a foot away. He looked up, studying Lucas's face with intense focus. Then, without warning, he reached out and touched Lucas's hand. Lucas froze. The boy's fingers were small, warm, trusting. "Your hands are big," Matteo said. "They are," Lucas replied, voice thick. "But they're good for holding hands when it's dark, or catching someone if they fall." Sophia climbed down too. "Can you draw?" "I'm not very good," he admitted. "I'll teach you," she said solemnly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, the ice cracked. Isabella watched, heart in her throat, as Lucas actually knelt, on the wooden floor, letting them circle him like curious birds. He didn't rush, didn't perform. He just was there, present, listening. Clara stood in the upstairs hallway, unseen, watching through the railing. She saw the way Lucas's shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. Saw the way his eyes kept drifting to Matteo, his son, as if memorizing every freckle. She turned away, a quiet ache in her chest. Not jealousy, but grief. Grief for the life she'd imagined with him, now dissolving like mist in morning light. Back downstairs, Isabella finally spoke. "They have a routine. After breakfast, we walk to the creek. They like to feed the ducks." Lucas looked up at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "Would it be all right if I joined you?" She studied him, the humility in his posture, the fear beneath his calm. This wasn't the man who demanded the world bend to his will. This was a father, raw and uncertain, asking for permission to belong. She nodded, just once, and in that single nod, something shifted not just between them, but in the very air of the lodge. Because the weekend hadn't been a getaway. It had been a collision. And now, with rain still dripping from the trees and 3 small hands reaching for disrupting the fragile rhythm of their world, Leo ran ahead, kicking up fallen leaves. "Race you to the big rock," he called over his shoulder. "No running near the water," Isabella called back, but her voice was warm, not sharp. Sophia looked up at Lucas, walking beside him now. "Do you know how to skip stones?" "I used to," he said, "when I was about your age." "Show me," he hesitated, then nodded. He knelt by the creek bank, found a flat, smooth stone, and held it out to her. "You hold it like this, flat side down. Flick your wrist like you're shooing a butterfly." She mimicked his motion, clumsy but determined. The stone plopped into the water with a soft splash. She frowned. "That wasn't skipping." "No," he said gently, "but it's a start." Mateo, quiet as ever, had wandered to the edge of the bank, crouching near a cluster of reeds. Suddenly, his foot slipped on the slick moss. He wobbled, then fell sideways with a startled cry. "Mateo!" Isabella lunged forward, but Lucas was faster. In one fluid motion, he caught the boy mid-fall, pulling him safely onto dry ground before either of them could blink. His arms wrapped around the small, trembling body without thought. Instinct, pure and primal. He held Mateo close, heart pounding, breath coming too fast. "It's okay," Lucas murmured, voice rough. "I've got you. You're safe." Mateo buried his face in Lucas's shoulder, arms clutching his neck like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Isabella stood frozen a few feet away, watching. She'd seen him move with precision in boardrooms, with cold efficiency in negotiations, but never like this. Never with fear. Never with tenderness. Lucas slowly eased Mateo onto his feet, crouching to his level. "Are you hurt?" Mateo shook his head, eyes wide. "You caught me. I'll always catch you," Lucas said, then caught himself, glancing at Isabella, as if realizing the weight of the promise he'd just made. But she didn't correct him, because in that moment she saw it too, the shift, the armor cracking, the man beneath finally emerging. Later, back at the lodge as the children napped, Isabella stood on the back porch, arms wrapped around herself. The sun had broken through the clouds, casting gold over the mountains. Behind her, the door opened softly. Lucas stepped out, holding 2 mugs of tea. He offered one to her. She took it without a word. They stood in silence for a long while, the only sound the distant call of a hawk and the rustle of leaves. "I didn't know," he finally said, voice low, "about any of it. The pregnancy, the birth, the years." "I know," she replied. You would have what?" Lucas, she turned to face him, eyes searching his. "Paid for everything, hired nurses, given them a trust fund, and visited on holidays. That's not what they needed. They needed a father who saw them, who chose them, not out of duty, but because he couldn't imagine his world without them." He looked down, shame burning in his chest. "I thought love made you weak. And now I think it's the only thing that makes you strong enough to face yourself." A breeze stirred between them, carrying the scent of wildflowers and distant rain. Inside, Sophia's voice floated through the screen door. "Sleepy and soft, Mama, is the man staying for dinner?" Isabella glanced at Lucas. He held his breath. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "Do you want to stay?" He met her gaze, raw and honest. "More than anything I've ever wanted." She studied him, the sincerity in his eyes, the tremor in his hands, the way he kept glancing toward the window, as if afraid the children might vanish if he looked away too long. "You don't get to decide that," she said gently. "They do." And as if on cue, Leo appeared in the doorway, rubbing his eyes. He looked at Lucas, then at the empty space beside Isabella on the porch bench. "Can he sit?" Leo asked. Isabella smiled faintly. "Only if he promises not to talk too much." Lucas exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, and sat down slowly, leaving just enough room between them for the past to breathe and the future to begin. From inside, Mateo's sleepy voice called out, "Papa!" The word hung in the air like a miracle. Lucas went utterly still. Isabella's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't stop him when he stood, walked to the doorway, and knelt in front of his son. "Yes, Mateo," he whispered. Mateo blinked up at him, innocent, certain. "Will you read us the fox story tonight?" Lucas's voice broke. "I'd be honored." And in that quiet mountain lodge, with sunlight spilling through the trees and 3 small hearts opening like petals, the tycoon who once believed control was power finally learned the truth: the greatest strength isn't in holding on. The air felt charged, like the quiet before a revelation. Lucas sat on the porch steps, elbows on his knees, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. He'd caught Mateo. He'd been called Papa, and now his mind raced faster than his heartbeat. Isabella stood in the doorway watching him. She saw the way his shoulders were tense, the way his jaw kept clenching and unclenching. He wasn't just processing what he'd seen. He was unraveling a truth he'd spent years avoiding. "You still think I kept them from you out of spite?" she said softly, stepping outside. He didn't look up. "I don't know what to think." "Then let me tell you what happened," she said, sitting beside him. Not too close, but close enough to share the same air. "The night I found out I was pregnant, I called you. You didn't answer. I left a message. You never called back." He winced. "I was in Singapore. The merger was more important," she finished gently. "I know. But then, 2 weeks later, I saw you on the cover of Forbes, arm around a model at some gala in Monaco, smiling like you hadn't a care in the world. And I realized you weren't just busy. You were gone. Not just from me, from the idea of us." Lucas finally turned to her, eyes raw. "If I'd known." "You'd have done what she asked, not accusing, just asking. Given me a check, set up a trust, told your lawyers to handle it." "Lucas, I didn't need your money. I needed you to care." He looked away, throat tight. "I didn't know how." "No," she said, voice softening. "You were never taught how." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of wind in the trees. Then, from inside, Leo's voice, curious, innocent, floated through the screen. "Mama, why does Papa look sad?" Isabella's breath hitched. She glanced at Lucas, who'd gone completely still at the word Papa. Before she could answer, Mateo appeared in the doorway, clutching the storybook. He patted over and held it out to Lucas. "You promised." Lucas took it slowly, fingers brushing the worn cover. "I did." He opened it, not to read, but to look at the pages, as if searching for something. And then he froze. Tucked between 2 pages was a crayon drawing, for stick figures holding hands. 3 small ones labeled Leo, Sophia, and Mateo, and the tall one on the end, faded, drawn tentatively, labeled Papa. Lucas's hands trembled. "You've known," he whispered, looking up at Mateo. Mateo nodded. "He comes in my dreams. You always wear a blue tie." Lucas's breath shattered. Isabella watched as tears welled in his eyes. Real, unguarded tears he made no move to hide. He reached out and brushed a thumb over the drawing, as if afraid it might smudge away. "I wore a blue tie the day I left you," he said to Isabella, voice barely audible. She nodded. He must have seen an old photo. Lucas looked at Mateo, then at the window where Sophia now stood, watching them with quiet curiosity. "Do they talk about me often?" "Not in words," Isabella said, "but in drawings, in questions, in the way Mateo looks at other fathers in the park. They've always known you existed. They just didn't know your name." He closed the book gently, holding it like something sacred. "I want to earn it," he said, turning to her. "Their name for me, their trust, their love, however long it takes." Isabella searched his face, the lines of guilt, yes, but also something new: resolve. Not the sharp, calculated determination of a CEO, but the quiet, steady courage of a man choosing to be better. Just then, Clara appeared at the top of the path, her suitcase in hand. She'd packed quietly, without drama. She stopped a few feet away, her expression calm but tinged with melancholy. Lucas, she said. He stood, startled. Clara, I'm taking the car back, she said. There's a train in 2 hours. I'll be fine. He stepped forward. You don't have to leave. I do, she said softly. Not because I'm angry, but because I finally understand you were never mine to keep. You belong to a future you didn't even know you had. Her eyes flicked to the children in the doorway, then back to him. Don't waste it. He didn't try to stop her. He simply nodded, voice thick. Thank you, Clara. She gave him a small, sad smile, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking softly against the gravel, disappearing into the golden light. Inside, Leo tugged on Lucas's sleeve. Is she gone? Yes, Lucas said. Are you staying? Lucas looked at Isabella, then at his children, then back at the life he'd built. A life of glass towers and silent rooms and endless control. I'm staying, he said. And this time it didn't feel like a choice. Felt like coming home. But as the sun dipped lower, casting everything in amber, a new fear crept in, quiet, insistent. What if he failed them? What if he wasn't enough? Isabella must have seen it in his eyes, because she placed a hand on his arm, light but grounding. You don't have to be perfect, she said, just present. And as the first stars blinked awake above the mountains, Lucas Moretti, the man who once owned everything but felt nothing, sat down on the porch with his children, opened the storybook, and read, voice shaking but sure. And the little fox whispered, even if you're far away, I'll always know your heart. This time, he wasn't reading to strangers. He was reading to his family. Moved in nearly an hour. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of questions, full of fear, full of something he couldn't name but knew he'd been starving for his whole life. Isabella emerged from the hallway, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat in the armchair across from him, watching the firelight dance across his face, the sharp angles softened by exhaustion, the guarded eyes now wide open with something like wonder and terror. You're thinking, she said finally, voice low. He exhaled slowly. I'm trying not to. She smiled faintly. That's new for you. He looked at her then, really looked, past the years, past the hurt, into the woman who'd carried his children alone, who'd shielded them from a world that valued power over presence. How did you do it? He asked. All of it. The nights, the fear, the everything. She wrapped her hands around the mug of tea she hadn't realized she was holding. One breath at a time. One day. Sometimes 1 hour. She paused. But mostly I did it because they deserved more than silence. More than absence. They deserved to know they were loved. Not because they were yours, but because they were theirs. 3 whole, bright souls. He swallowed hard. Did you ever hate me? No, she said without hesitation. I grieved you, but I never hated you. Because even when you walked away, I remembered the man who laughed at my terrible cooking, who held my hand during thunderstorms, who whispered, I love you, like it was a secret only we knew. Her voice softened. I held on to that man, not the tycoon, the man. Lucas looked down, shame burning behind his eyes. That man disappeared. Maybe, she said gently, or maybe he just got lost. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, voice rough, tell me about the birth. She hesitated, then nodded. They came early, 28 weeks. I was alone in the hospital for 3 days before they let me hold them. Each one fit in the palm of my hand. Her voice trembled slightly. Leo was the strongest. Sophia didn't cry for the first 2 days. Just watched everything with those serious eyes. Mateo, he fought the hardest. They said he might not. She stopped, took a breath. But he did. Every day he chose to stay. Lucas's hands clenched into fists. I should have been there. You weren't ready, she said, not unkindly. And I wouldn't have let you come just out of guilt. I wanted you to come because you wanted to, because you saw them and couldn't look away. He looked toward the hallway, as if he could see them through the walls. I can't look away now. No, she whispered. And you shouldn't. A log shifted in the fire, sending up a shower of sparks. The silence returned, but it was different now, less heavy, more shared. Then Lucas asked the question that had been clawing at him since the moment he saw them. "Why didn't you tell me later after they were born?" Even once Isabella's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "Because the first time I held Matteo, I knew this love was too big to be conditional. If I brought you in and you left again, if you treated them like complications, like mistakes, they'd spend their lives wondering if they were enough." She leaned forward slightly. "I chose to protect their hearts over your right to know." He didn't argue. He couldn't, because he saw it now, the courage it took to raise 3 souls in silence, to love them so fiercely that even their father's absence couldn't dim their light. "I won't leave," he said, voice cracking. "Not now. Not ever." She studied him. People change, Lucas, but promises made in emotion don't always last in reality. "I'm not making a promise," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'm making a vow to show up every day, even when it's hard, even when I'm scared, even when I don't know how." She held his stare for a long moment, then nodded just once. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a beginning. Outside, an owl called softly in the pines. Inside, the fire crackled, warm and steady. Then, from the hallway, a small voice, "Papa," all at once. Lucas was on his feet. Matteo stood in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing one eye, the other wide awake. He didn't cry. He just looked at Lucas like he'd been waiting. Lucas knelt. "Hey, buddy." "Bad dream?" Matteo shook his head. "I just wanted to make sure you were still here." Lucas's breath caught. He opened his arms. Matteo walked into them without hesitation, small arms wrapping around his neck. "I'm here," Lucas whispered into his hair. "I'm not going anywhere." Isabella watched from the chair, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Not of sadness, but of release, of hope, because this was the moment she'd waited for. Not grand gestures, not apologies, just a father holding his son in the quiet dark, promising nothing but presence. And in that moment, Lucas Moretti stopped being a tycoon. He became a dad. And somewhere deep in his chest, a door he'd kept locked for decades finally swung open, flooding him with a love so vast, so terrifying, so right, it nearly brought him to his knees. The creak of a floorboard, the soft sigh of wind through the pines, sent his pulse fluttering. He kept replaying Matteo's voice. "I just wanted to make sure you were still here," as if he'd been waiting his whole life for someone to stay. And Lucas had almost missed it all. Down the hall, a door opened. Soft footsteps approached. He didn't need to look up to know it was Isabella. She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You're not sleeping." "I don't deserve to," he said quietly. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click. "That's not how love works, Lucas. You don't earn rest. You just take it, so you can keep going." He looked at her then, really looked. She was tired. Not the polished kind of fatigue that came from social events, but the deep, bone-weary kind that settled in after years of carrying the weight of 3 lives alone. "Tell me about the hardest part," he said, voice rough. "After they were born." She hesitated, then sat on the chair by the window, her silhouette outlined by moonlight. "The first winter," she said after a long pause. "Matteo caught pneumonia. I drove through a snowstorm at 3 a.m. because the ambulance couldn't reach us. I held him in the back seat, singing that stupid lullaby you used to hum, Blackbird, just so he'd hear a familiar voice." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I was so scared I'd lose him, and in that moment, I hated you. Not for leaving me, but for not being there to hold him with me." Lucas closed his eyes. The guilt was a physical ache. "But then," she continued, "he got better. And I realized something: I didn't need you to survive. But they deserve to know you. Not the ghost of you. Not the name. You." He stood slowly, pacing to the window. "What if I fail them? What if I don't know how to be what they need?" "You already are," she said softly, "just by asking that question." He turned to her, eyes glistening. I've spent my whole life building empires. But this terrifies me more than any boardroom ever did. Because this matters, she said. Not your name, not your net worth, just your heart. A silence settled between them, thick with unspoken years. Then, from the hallway, Sophia's voice, clear and curious, "Mama, is Papa awake?" Isabella stood. "Always," Lucas answered before she could. Sophia appeared in the doorway holding a notebook. She walked straight to Lucas and held it out. "I drew you." He took it carefully. On the page was a detailed sketch, not stick figures this time, but a real drawing. A man with kind eyes, kneeling beside 3 children by a creek. Above them, a sun with a smile, and in the corner, written in careful letters, "My Papa." Lucas's breath hitched. "You did this," she nodded. "I watch you. You look at us like we're magic." He knelt, pulling her into a gentle hug. "You are magic." She pulled back, serious. "Will you teach me how to build things like your buildings?" He smiled faintly. "I'll teach you how to build anything you want." She considered this, then asked, "Even a home?" His throat tightened. "Especially a home." Isabella watched from the doorway, her heart aching in the best way. This wasn't the reunion she'd feared, full of lawyers and custody battles and cold negotiations. This was slower, tender, real. Later, after Sophia returned to bed and the lodge fell into deep silence, Lucas stood outside on the back porch, staring up at the stars. Isabella joined him, handing him a fresh cup of tea. "They've never had stability," she said quietly. "We've moved 3 times, always chasing cheaper rent, better schools, safer neighborhoods. I never wanted them to feel like a burden." "You gave them everything," he said, "more than I ever could." "No," she corrected gently. "I gave them love. You can give them something else." "What?" "A father who chooses them every single day, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's hard." He turned to her, eyes searching. "Do you think they'll ever trust me?" "They already do," she said. "Matteo called you Papa. Sophia drew you into her world. Leo watches you like you're a puzzle he wants to solve." She paused. "They're giving you a chance, Lucas. The question is, are you ready to step into it?" He looked toward the window where their silhouettes slept behind the glass. "I don't know how to be the man they need." "You don't have to be perfect," she said, her voice soft as falling snow. "Just be there. Be real. Be theirs." The wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, low, mournful, but not lost, just calling out. And in that moment, Lucas made a silent promise. Not to Isabella, not to himself, but to the 3 small souls sleeping just steps away. He would learn. He would stay. Isabella moved around him, pouring juice, slicing fruit, her presence steady as a heartbeat. She glanced at him once, then twice, sensing the shift in him. The way his shoulders weren't quite so rigid. The way his eyes kept drifting to Matteo's laugh, to Sophia's thoughtful frown, to Leo's bold gestures. "You're different," she said quietly, handing him a cup of coffee. He wrapped his hands around the warmth. "I feel like I'm seeing for the first time." Before she could respond, the front door opened. Clara stood in the doorway. Lucas froze. Isabella turned, surprised. Clara wasn't wearing her usual polished elegance. Her hair was loose, her coat slightly wrinkled, and her eyes held a quiet resolve that hadn't been there the night before. "I came back," she said simply. Lucas stepped forward, voice low. "Clara, I didn't leave because I was angry," she interrupted gently. "I left because I needed to think. And I realized something on the train." She looked past him, to the table where the children had gone still, watching her with wide, curious eyes. "I wasn't meant to be your future, Lucas. But that doesn't mean I can't be your friend." He blinked. "You came back." To say that, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "I came back to tell you I'm not vanishing like a ghost. I care about you too much for that." Her voice softened. "And I care enough to let you go to them without making you feel guilty." Isabella watched her carefully, sensing no pretense, only grace. Clara walked to the table and knelt, meeting the children's eyes one by one. "Hello," she said warmly. "I'm Clara. I'm a friend of your papa's." Leo tilted his head. "Are you his girlfriend?" Clara smiled faintly. "Not anymore, but I hope I can be your friend too." Sophia studied her. "Do you like stories?" "I do," Clara said. "Especially the kind with brave kids and happy endings." Mateo, ever observant, pointed to her hand. "You're not wearing a ring." Clara's smile deepened. "No, because some things aren't meant to be kept on a finger. Some things are meant to be set free." Lucas stood behind her, stunned by her quiet strength. He'd expected anger, maybe tears, certainly distance. Not this kindness, this dignity. After a moment, Clara stood and turned to him. "I called your assistant this morning. Told her to cancel your meetings for the next 2 weeks. Said you had a family emergency." He stared at her. "You did that. You needed time," she said simply. "And they deserve it." Isabella stepped forward then, extending her hand. "Thank you, Clara." Clara took it, her grip firm, her eyes sincere. "I've seen what he was, but last night I saw what he could be, and that's worth protecting." She turned to Lucas one last time. "Don't waste it, and don't apologize. Just love them well." Then, with a final nod, she walked out, leaving behind not bitterness, but blessing. The silence that followed was thick, sacred. Leo broke it. "Is she nice?" "Yes," Lucas said, voice rough. "She's very nice." Sophia looked up at him. "Does this mean you're staying for more than dinner?" He knelt beside the table, meeting each of their eyes. "I'm staying for as long as you'll have me." Mateo reached out and took his hand. Forever, Lucas's throat tightened. "If you'll let me." Isabella watched, tears welling. Not of sadness, but of relief, because Clara's return hadn't threatened their fragile new beginning. It had sealed it. By choosing grace over possession, she'd given Lucas the space to become the father his children needed. Later, as the children played outside with wooden blocks, Lucas stood by the porch with Isabella, the morning sun warming their backs. "She didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "No," Isabella agreed. "But real love sometimes means stepping aside so someone else can step in." He looked at her, searching. "What about us?" She didn't look away. "I don't know, Lucas. We have years of silence between us. Trust isn't rebuilt in a weekend." She paused. "But for them, we can learn to coexist, to communicate, to be a team." He nodded slowly. "That's more than I deserve." "It's not about what you deserve," she said. "It's about what they need." Just then, Leo ran up, breathless. "Papa!" Sophia built a tower, but it keeps falling. "Can you help?" Lucas looked at Isabella. She gave him the smallest nod, and as he followed his son back inside, knees bending, hands ready to steady blocks, heart ready to steady lives, he realized something profound he hadn't found his children. They'd found him, and in their laughter, in their fragile trust, in the quiet hope in their eyes, he finally saw the man he was meant to be. Not the tycoon who took what he wanted, but the father who gave everything he had. The future was uncertain, but for the first time he wasn't afraid. Air now stained with dirt, nicked by twigs, and moving with a tenderness that surprised even him. Sophia was sketching nearby, her brow furrowed in concentration. Mateo, ever the observer, sat beside Lucas, handing him twigs like they were precious tools. "You're good at this," Mateo said quietly. Lucas smiled, though his chest ached. "First time, actually." "You're not scared of getting dirty," Mateo observed. "No," Lucas said, meeting his son's eyes. "Some things are worth getting messy for." Isabella watched from the porch, arms wrapped around a mug of tea, her heart full in a way that almost hurt. She saw the way Lucas listened, truly listened, when Leo explained the rules of their game. Saw how he didn't rush Sophia when she took 10 minutes to choose the right leaf for her drawing. Saw how he let Mateo lean against his shoulder without pulling away. But then, disaster. Leo, sprinting across the clearing to fetch a dragon egg, a painted rock, tripped on a root. He went down hard, skinning his knee on the rough earth. A sharp cry tore from his throat. Not just pain, but shock. The kind only children feel when the world suddenly betrays them. Before Isabella could move, Lucas was already there. He didn't hesitate, didn't flinch. He dropped to his knees in the dirt, pulling Leo gently into his lap. Hey, it's okay. Breathe. Leo sobbed, clutching his leg. It hurts. I know, buddy. I know. Lucas's voice was low, steady, instinctive. He pulled a clean handkerchief from his pocket, ironically monogrammed with his initials, and pressed it gently to the scrape. You were so brave running for that egg. Real knights get scars. Leo sniffled, looking up with tear-filled eyes. Will it bleed forever? No, Lucas said, smiling faintly. Just long enough to remind you how strong you are. Isabella stood frozen on the porch, her breath caught in her throat. Because this was the moment she'd never let herself imagine. Not the boardroom titan, not the distant husband, but this man kneeling in the dirt, soothing his son's pain with words softer than silk, holding him like he was the most precious thing in the world. It wasn't performative. It wasn't guilt. It was instinct, pure, unguarded love. Sophia came running over, eyes wide. Is he okay? He's a warrior, Lucas said, still holding Leo. Warriors fall, but they always get back up. Matteo knelt beside them, placing a tiny hand on Leo's arm. I'll guard you while you heal. Leo managed a wobbly smile. Okay. Isabella finally stepped forward, her voice gentle. Let me clean it properly. Lucas didn't let go right away. He met her gaze over Leo's head, and in his eyes, she saw it. The dawning realization that fatherhood wasn't a role to play. It was a current that ran through you, changing your bones, your breath, your very pulse. Later, as she dabbed antiseptic on Leo's knee in the kitchen, Lucas stood by the sink, washing his hands slowly, as if trying to memorize the feel of the moment. He called me Papa again, he said quietly, not looking at her. When he was crying. Isabella paused, cotton swab in hand. He trusts you. I don't know how to carry that, he admitted, voice breaking. The weight of it, the honor. You just keep showing up, she said. Even when it's messy, even when you're scared. He turned to her, water dripping from his fingers. What if I'm not enough? She walked over, placed a hand on his arm. The first real touch between them in years. You already are. Look at them. She nodded toward the living room, where the 3 children were now building a hospital for Leo's knee out of pillows and stuffed animals. They don't need perfection, Lucas. They need you, the real you, the one who stays. He closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing her words like rain after drought. That evening, as fireflies blinked to life in the gathering dusk, Lucas sat on the porch steps with the children nestled around him. Leo's knee was bandaged, Sophia was sketching the fireflies, and Matteo leaned against his shoulder, drowsy but content. Tell us a story, Sophia said. Lucas hesitated. I'm not very good at stories. You're good at this one, Matteo murmured. So Lucas began, not with dragons or castles, but with something true. Once, he said softly, there was a man who thought love made you weak. He built walls so high he forgot what the sky looked like. But then, one day, 3 lights appeared in the darkness, and he realized the walls weren't keeping him safe. They were keeping him alone. Sophia looked up. Did he tear them down? Lucas glanced toward the window, where Isabella stood watching, her eyes glistening. He's trying, he whispered, and in the quiet hum of the night, with his children breathing softly against him and the scent of pine in the air, Lucas Moretti, the man who once owned everything but felt nothing, finally understood the greatest empire isn't built with steel and money. Porch, hands braced on the railing, staring into the dark forest as if searching for answers in the rustle of leaves and the distant cry of an owl. He didn't hear her approach. He only felt her presence. The quiet shift in the air, the familiar scent of lavender and worn paper that always clung to Isabella. She stopped beside him, not too close, but near enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her. Neither spoke for a long time. There was no need. The night held everything they hadn't said yet. He asked me something today, Isabella finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mateo. Lucas turned slightly. What did he ask? She hugged herself, eyes fixed on the stars. He said, Mama, if Papa stays, does that mean you'll stop being sad? Lucas's breath caught. You're still sad. She didn't look at him. Not sad, just careful. I spent years building a life where their happiness didn't depend on anyone else. Not even you. And now, her voice trembled. Now you're here, and I don't know how to let you in without breaking what we already have. He lowered his head. I don't want to break anything. I just want to be part of it. She finally turned to him, moonlight catching the unshed tears in her eyes. Why now, Lucas? Why not 5 years ago? Why not when I was sitting in a hospital room, holding a baby who weighed less than 2 pounds, begging the universe to let him live? He didn't flinch. Because I was a fool. I thought love was a distraction, a weakness. I thought having everything meant never needing anyone. And now I see that I had nothing. His voice cracked. All those deals, those towers. I built a kingdom with no heart. And then I came here and saw 3 souls who carry mine in their eyes, and I realized I've been dead inside for years, and they brought me back to life. Isabella studied him, searching for the slightest trace of performance, of manipulation. But all she saw was raw, trembling honesty. You never asked for them, she said softly. No, he admitted. But the moment I saw them, I knew I was made to love them. Not because they're mine by blood, but because they're me in ways I never was brave enough to be. A breeze stirred between them, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Then, quietly, I never took your money, she said. Not a cent. Even when the hospital bills piled up. Even when I had to sell my grandmother's ring just to pay rent. Lucas stared at her, stunned. Why? Because I needed you to come back for the right reason. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Not because you owed us, but because you loved us. He closed his eyes, the weight of her sacrifice crashing over him like a wave. She hadn't just raised his children. She'd protected his chance to be their father by refusing to let him off the hook with a check. I would have given you everything, he said hoarsely. I didn't want everything, she replied. I just wanted you to choose us, not out of guilt, not out of pride, but because you couldn't imagine your life without them. He turned fully to her now, his eyes glistening. I can't. Not anymore. She held his gaze for a long moment, the years of silence, fear, and hope suspended between them like stars. Then, from inside the house, a soft cry. Mateo. They moved at the same time, crossing the threshold in silence. He was sitting up in bed, clutching his stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with a nightmare. Mama, he whimpered. I'm here, Isabella said, sitting on the edge of the bed, smoothing his hair, but Mateo looked past her. To Lucas, standing in the doorway, hesitant. Papa, he asked, voice small. Lucas didn't wait for permission. He crossed the room and knelt beside the bed. I'm right here, buddy. Mateo reached out, and Lucas took his hand without hesitation. Will you stay until I fall asleep? Yes, Lucas said, without a second's pause. Isabella watched as Lucas settled onto the floor beside the bed, still holding Mateo's hand, his back against the wall, eyes already heavy but determined. She lingered in the doorway, heart pounding. This wasn't reconciliation. Not yet, but it was something deeper. It was the beginning of a family, not built on grand declarations, but on scraped knees, whispered fears, and the quiet courage to say, I'll stay. And as she turned to leave, Lucas's voice followed her, soft but certain. Thank you, Isabella. She paused, not looking back. For what? For giving them your strength, so they could give me my soul. Of his son's chest. He hadn't slept, not really. Every time his eyes drifted shut, images flashed behind his lids. Isabella alone in a hospital room. Sophia drawing a father she'd never met. Leo falling and calling for someone who wasn't there. And now he was here. But was it enough downstairs? The scent of coffee and toast drifted up the stairs. He heard Isabella moving in the kitchen, the soft clink of dishes, the murmur of her voice as she spoke to the children. A normal sound, an ordinary rhythm, and yet, to him, it felt sacred. He stood slowly, muscles stiff from the floor, and walked to the window. The mist curled between the trees like smoke from a forgotten fire. He thought of Clara's grace, of Isabella's quiet strength, of the way his children looked at him, not with suspicion, but with tentative hope. And that terrified him more than any boardroom ambush ever had, because hope meant he could fail them. He descended the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Isabella was at the stove, flipping pancakes, her back to him. The children sat at the table. Leo with his bandaged knee propped on a stool, Sophia coloring intently, Matteo sipping milk with sleepy eyes. When Lucas entered, all three looked up. "Papa," Matteo said, smiling. Lucas managed to smile back, but it didn't reach his eyes. He sat at the table, hands clasped tightly in his lap. Isabella glanced at him, sensing the shift. "You okay?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched Leo poke at his pancake, then suddenly look up. "Are you going away today?" Leo asked, voice small. The question hung in the air like a shard of glass. Lucas's breath caught. He looked at Isabella, then back at his son. "No," he said firmly. "Not today." "But what about tomorrow?" Sophia asked, her pencil hovering over the page. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know this: I'm not leaving you again. Not unless you tell me to." Matteo reached across the table and placed his small hand over Lucas's clenched fist. "We won't tell you to go." Tears pricked Lucas's eyes. He blinked them back, throat tight. Isabella turned from the stove, wiping her hands on a towel. "Lucas," she said gently, "they need certainty, not just words." "I know," he said, voice rough, "and I want to give it to them. But I don't know how to balance the life I built with the life I just found." She sat across from him, her gaze steady. "You don't balance them. You choose." He looked down. "What if I lose everything? What if you gain everything you never knew you were missing?" He met her eyes. Deep, unwavering, full of a love that had endured silence, distance, and fear. And in that moment, he saw it clearly: his empire had been built on sand. But this was bedrock. Later, as the children played outside with buckets and shovels, Lucas stood by the porch railing, phone pressed to his ear. "Cancel the Singapore trip," he said, voice quiet but firm. "Postpone the merger review. Indefinitely." A pause. "No, I don't care what the board says. I'm not available." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, feeling lighter than he had in years. Isabella joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "You really did it." "I did," he said. "Not because I'm walking away from who I am, but because I'm finally becoming who I was meant to be." She handed him a mug. Their fingers brushed, just for a second, and something passed between them, wordless but undeniable. That afternoon, as rain began to patter softly on the roof, the 4 of them sat on the living room floor. Lucas, Isabella, and the 3 children, building a city out of blocks, blankets, and wild imagination. Leo declared himself mayor. Sophia designed parks. Matteo assigned homes to every stuffed animal. And Lucas, he built a house in the center. "For us," he said softly. Isabella looked at him, eyes shining. "All of us," he nodded. "If you'll have me." She didn't answer with words. She just leaned her shoulder against his briefly, gently, and kept building. Sophia sat nearby, sketching the scene in her notebook. The way Lucas's brow furrowed in concentration. The way Matteo leaned into him without fear. Leo, ever restless, had abandoned his fort building to roam the bookshelves, pulling out old volumes with titles worn by time. He stopped suddenly, holding up a photo album. One Isabella must have left out by accident. Dust motes danced in the light as he opened it. "Mama," he called. "Who's this?" Isabella looked up from the kitchen, wiping her hands. "What is it, Leo?" He pointed to a faded photo near the front, a younger Lucas and Isabella on a beach, arms around each other, sun in their hair, laughter in their eyes. Isabella's breath hitched. She hadn't meant for them to see it. Not yet. Lucas froze, his hands still on the puzzle pieces. Before she could answer, Mateo looked up at Lucas, his gray eyes wide, searching. Is that you? Lucas nodded slowly. Yes. Sophia closed her sketchbook and crawled closer. Were you married? We were, Lucas said, voice rough. Leo tilted his head. Then why aren't you together now? The room went very still. Isabella walked over slowly, kneeling beside them. Sometimes grown-ups love each other, but they don't know how to stay together. Not because they don't care, but because they're still learning how to love themselves. Lucas looked at her, his heart pounding. And now, he asked softly, are we still learning? She held his gaze, and for a moment, the years fell away. The silence, the hurt, the miles between them. Every day, she whispered. Mateo studied the photo, then looked at Lucas. Were you happy then? Lucas swallowed hard. I didn't know what happy really was, he admitted. I thought success was happiness. Control was safety. But looking at you three, I finally understand. Happiness is being needed. Not for what you have, but for who you are. Leo frowned. But you left. I did, Lucas said, voice breaking. And that's the biggest regret of my life. Sophia reached out and touched his arm. But you came back. Because I realized something, he said, looking at each of them in turn. You don't get a second chance to be someone's first everything. And you three, you're my first everything. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. She looked away, blinking fast. Then Mateo asked the question that had lived in his heart since the moment he saw Lucas's face. He stood up, walked right in front of him, and looked straight into his eyes. Are you? Our dad? The room stopped breathing. Lucas felt the world tilt. His chest tightened like a vice. This wasn't just a question, it was a threshold. A moment that would define the rest of his life. He didn't look at Isabella. He didn't search for the right words. He just reached out, took Mateo's small hands in his, and said, voice trembling but sure, yes, if you'll let me be. Mateo didn't smile. He just nodded, as if he'd always known. Then he climbed into Lucas's lap, as natural as rain falling to earth. Leo and Sophia exchanged a glance. Then, one by one, they crawled over too, until Lucas was surrounded by the three of them, their warmth seeping into his bones, their trust settling into his soul like roots finding soil. Isabella watched from the edge of the rug, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, not even of joy, but of release, of years of holding her breath, finally exhaling. Because this was the moment she'd both feared and hoped for. Not a legal document. Not a dramatic reunion. Just a quiet, honest answer to a child's question. And in that answer, a family was born. Later, when the children drifted off to nap under shared blankets, Lucas sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Isabella joined him, handing him a fresh cup of tea. You handled that beautifully, she said. He shook his head. I didn't handle anything. I just told the truth. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Truth is the bravest thing you can give them. He turned to her, eyes glistening. What happens now? She looked toward the hallway where the children slept. Now, we take it one day at a time. You don't need to move mountains, Lucas. Just be here. Be present. Let them see you. Not the tycoon, but the man who chooses them, again and again. He reached for her hand, slowly, hesitantly, and to his surprise, she didn't pull away. Her fingers curled around his, warm and steady. Outside, the clouds parted just enough for a sliver of late afternoon sun to break through, casting golden light across the floor, across their joined hands, across the photo album still open on the rug, now framed not by loss, but by hope. And in that quiet mountain lodge, with rain still dripping from the eaves and three small hearts beating in peaceful rhythm down the hall, Lucas Moretti finally understood he hadn't found his children. Isabella stood in the kitchen doorway, drying a teacup with slow, deliberate motions. She'd been watching them all afternoon. The way Lucas's voice softened when he read aloud, the way he didn't flinch when Leo accidentally kicked his shin, The way he let Mateo trace the lines on his palm like he was memorizing them. This wasn't performance. This was surrender. Then, as if sensing the weight of the moment, Mateo looked up from his puzzle and asked, voice clear and calm, "Papa, do you love us?" Lucas went utterly still. Not because it was a hard question, but because it was the only one that mattered. He set the book down carefully, looked at each of them, really looked. At Leo's guarded hope, Sophia's quiet intensity, Mateo's open heart. "Yes," he said, voice rough with emotion. "More than anything in this world. More than I knew it was possible to love." Sophia tilted her head. "Even more than your fancy buildings. Especially more than my buildings," he said, smiling faintly. "Because those can be rebuilt. But you're one of a kind. And I almost missed you." Leo sat up, suddenly serious. "Why did you leave Mama?" Isabella tensed in the doorway, but Lucas didn't look at her. He met Leo's eyes with unwavering honesty. "Because I was afraid," he said. "Afraid that loving someone this much would make me weak. Afraid that if I let you in, I'd lose control. But I was wrong. Loving you doesn't make me weak. It makes me brave." Mateo stood then and walked over, climbing into Lucas's lap without a word. He rested his head against his chest, right over his heart. Lucas wrapped his arms around him, holding on like he'd been waiting a lifetime for this exact moment. Isabella finally stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. "They deserve to know the truth, Lucas. All of it." He nodded. "I know." He looked down at Mateo. "I didn't know about you. Not at first. And when I found out, I was too late. But that's on me. Not on you. Never on you." Sophia studied him. "Do you wish you never had us?" The question cut through him like glass. He pulled back slightly so he could see her face. "Sophia," he said, voice trembling. "The day you were born was the day my life should have begun. But I was too blind to see it. Now that I do, I thank the universe every second for letting me find you." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes. She didn't wipe them away. Leo, ever the protector, stood up and walked over. He didn't hug Lucas. He wasn't ready for that yet. But he placed a hand on his shoulder, small but firm. "Okay," he said. "Just don't go again." "I won't," Lucas promised. "Not unless you tell me to." "And we won't," Mateo whispered against his chest. Isabella watched, her own tears falling silently, because this raw, unguarded exchange was what she'd protected them for. Not from poverty, not from hardship, but from doubt, from wondering if they were loved. Now they knew. Later, after the children were tucked into bed, after Lucas had kissed each forehead, after he'd whispered, "I love you," like a prayer into the dark, he stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall, eyes closed, breathing like he was trying to hold the moment inside his ribs. Isabella appeared beside him, arms crossed, but her expression was soft. "You did good," she said. He opened his eyes, looking at her with a vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I'm terrified, Isabella. Of what? That one day, they'll realize I'm not enough, that I'll say the wrong thing, that I'll fail them." She stepped closer. "You already are enough, just by being here, just by loving them honestly." He looked down the hall toward their rooms. "What if I mess up?" "You will," she said gently. "And that's okay. What matters is that you come back, that you keep choosing them." He turned to her then, searching her face. "And what about you? Do I get to choose you too?" Someday she didn't answer right away. She just reached out and brushed a tear from his cheek. Her touch so light, so familiar, it unraveled something deep inside him. "Don't worry about me," she whispered. "Worry about being the father they deserve. The rest, we'll figure out together." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the scent of rain and pine and something else. Something new, something like hope. And as Lucas stood there, heart full to bursting, he realized something profound. He hadn't just discovered his children this weekend. He'd discovered himself. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't running from love. He was running straight into it. Arms open, heart bare, ready to be broken and rebuilt, again and again, for them, because they were worth every risk. Isabella joined him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't speak at first. She just stood beside him, close enough that their elbows brushed in the cool air, and handed him a cup. "They're happy," she said softly. He nodded, eyes fixed on Matteo as he carefully cupped a firefly in his palms, whispering something to it before letting it go. "They should be. They've waited their whole lives to meet me." "And you?" she asked. "Are you happy?" He turned to her then, really looked at her. The woman who'd carried his children through silence, who'd shielded them from a world that valued power over presence, who'd never once sought revenge, only protection. "I don't know if I'm happy yet," he admitted, "but I'm whole. For the first time." She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that holds years of ache and hope in equal measure. Inside, Leo's voice called out, bright and clear, "Papa, come see what we built." Lucas set his mug down and followed, Isabella trailing a few steps behind. In the living room, the children had rearranged the furniture into a sprawling family house. Couch cushions as walls, blankets as roofs, pillows as beds. "This is your room," Sophia said, pointing to a nest of blankets near the fireplace. "So you don't have to leave." Lucas's breath caught. He knelt beside her. "You made me a home," Matteo nodded solemnly. "With a window so you can watch the stars." Leo crossed his arms. "But only if you promise to stay." Lucas looked at Isabella over their heads. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something deeper, permission. He turned back to his children, his voice steady despite the tremor in his chest. "I don't just want to stay for a weekend. I want to be your dad. Every day. At breakfast. At bedtime. When you're sick. When you're scared. When you're proud. I want to be there for all of it, if you'll let me." Sophia studied him. "Even when it's boring." "Especially then," he said, smiling. "Because boring is where love lives." Matteo reached for his hand. "Will you teach us things?" "Everything I know," Lucas said. "And we'll learn the rest together." Leo hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged him, quick and tight, before pulling away with a mumbled, "Okay, but you have to eat your vegetables." Lucas laughed, the sound unfamiliar even to himself, warm, unguarded, real. "Deal." Later, as the children played outside with buckets and watering cans, Lucas and Isabella sat on the porch steps in comfortable silence. The sun had burned through the mist, painting everything in gold. "I spoke to my lawyer this morning," he said quietly. Isabella tensed slightly. "About custody?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "About something else." He turned to her. "I want to do this right. No lawyers, no courts, just us, co-parenting, together, if you're willing." She looked at him, searching. "You're not trying to take them from me?" "Never," he said, voice fierce. "You're their mother. That's not mine to claim. But I want to be their father, not just in name but in action, in presence, in love." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. There will be days you're frustrated, days I'm angry, days we disagree." "I know," he said, "but we'll talk. We'll listen. We'll put them first." She reached out then, not for his hand, but to tuck a stray lock of hair behind his ear, a gesture so tender it stole his breath. "You've changed, Lucas." "I had to," he said, "because I finally saw what mattered." Inside, Sophia appeared in the doorway holding a drawing. "Papa, can you hang this in your room?" He took it. It was a family portrait, 4 figures holding hands under a rainbow. 3 small ones labeled Leo, Sophia, and Matteo, and the tall one beside them, drawn in bold, confident lines, labeled Dad. Not Papa, not Mr. Dad. Lucas's vision blurred. He stood and walked inside, Isabella following silently. He found a thumbtack in a drawer and carefully pinned the drawing to the wall beside the bed they'd made for him. "There," he said softly. "Now I'll see it every morning." Sophia smiled. "Now you're really ours." That night, after bedtime stories and whispered, "I love yous, Lucas," stood in the hallway again, listening to the soft rhythm of their breathing. Isabella appeared beside him, arms crossed, but her expression was softer now. "What happens when the weekend ends?" she asked. He didn't look away from their doors. "I'll come back. Every day. I'll find a place nearby. Or I'll commute. Or I'll rebuild my life around theirs." He finally turned to her. "I'm not walking away from this. Not ever again." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Then tomorrow you start." He smiled, small but certain. "Tomorrow I take them to the park. And I'll push them on the swings until their arms get tired. And I'll be there too," she said. "Watching. Making sure you don't drop Leo." He chuckled, but his eyes were serious. "Thank you, Isabella, for giving me this chance." She stepped closer, so close he could feel her breath. "I didn't give you the chance. They did." And as the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light through the trees, his hand. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel like he was missing something. Isabella moved quietly around him, refilling coffee, humming under her breath. The kind of ordinary magic that had built a world for their children while he'd been too busy to notice. "You're nervous," she said, not looking at him. He exhaled a soft laugh. "Terrified." She finally turned, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "Why, you've faced hostile takeovers, international scandals, boardroom coups. But 3 kids eating pancakes has you sweating." "It's not the same," he said, voice low. "Those were battles I could control. This is trust. And I can't force it. I can't buy it. I have to earn it, one moment at a time." She studied him, then nodded toward the table. "Go sit with them." He hesitated. "What if I say the wrong thing?" "Then you'll say, 'I'm sorry,' and try again," she said gently. "That's how it works, Lucas. Not perfectly, but honestly." He took a breath and walked over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, standing beside the table. Leo looked up. "Only if you promise not to talk about money." Lucas smiled. "Deal." He sat, and for a moment, silence fell. Not awkward, but full. Then Sophia pushed her napkin sketch toward him. It was him, sitting right here, sunlight on his face, a small but real smile on his lips. "You draw me like I belong," he said, voice rough. "You do," she said simply. Mateo reached across the table and placed a blueberry on Lucas's plate. "You didn't eat yours." Lucas picked it up, touched. "Thank you, buddy." Later, as they cleared the table together, Lucas washing, Isabella drying, the children giggling as they tried to fold napkins into swans. The rhythm felt natural, as if they'd been doing this for years, not days. But then Leo stopped suddenly, frowning. "Papa, will you still be here when I have my soccer game next week?" Lucas froze, sponge in hand. He looked at Isabella. She nodded slightly. "It's Saturday, at the community field." He turned back to Leo, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "But what if you have a meeting?" Leo pressed, eyes searching. "I'll cancel it," Lucas said firmly. "No meeting is more important than watching you play." Sophia tilted her head. "What if you get bored?" He laughed softly. "I'll count your goals instead of checking my phone." Mateo tugged his sleeve. "Will you clap?" "Loudly," Lucas promised. Isabella watched from the sink, her heart aching in the sweetest way. This wasn't just presence, it was commitment. And it was unfolding in the quietest, most ordinary moments. After breakfast, Lucas helped pack a small bag for the day, a water bottle, snacks, a blanket, extra socks. When he zipped it shut, he realized something: he was preparing for a life, not just a visit. As they stepped outside, the sun warm on their faces, Mateo slipped his hand into Lucas's without a word. Lucas looked down at their joined hands, small and trusting in his large, once cold grip, and felt something settle deep in his chest. At the park, Lucas didn't sit on the bench like the other parents. He stood at the edge of the field, hands in his pockets, eyes never leaving Leo as he ran drills with boundless energy. When Leo scored a goal during practice, he turned immediately toward the sideline, searching. And when his eyes found Lucas, his face lit up like sunrise. Lucas clapped, just as promised, loud enough that other parents turned to look. He didn't care. Sophia sat beside him later, sketching the scene. "He looked for you," she said quietly. "I know," Lucas said, throat tight. "He's never done that before." He looked at her. With anyone, she shook her head. Only Mama. Isabella, sitting nearby on the blanket with Mateo, caught his eye. She didn't smile. She just gave him the smallest nod. "You're doing it." Later, as they walked back to the lodge, Leo bouncing ahead, Sophia humming, and Mateo half asleep against Lucas's shoulder, Isabella spoke softly beside him. "You're learning." "I'm trying," he said. "You don't have to be perfect," she repeated as she had before. "Just consistent." He glanced at her. "What if I mess up?" "You will," she said. "And when you do, you'll apologize. You'll listen. You'll stay." He nodded, holding Mateo a little tighter. "I'm not leaving." "I know," she said. "But you have to prove it every day. Not to me. To them." He understood. This wasn't a grand gesture. It was 1,000 small ones, showing up, paying attention, choosing love over convenience again and again. That night, as he tucked Leo into bed, the boy looked up at him, serious. "Papa,